So I'm David. I was in the audience last year. I remember thinking, God, what an amazing building this is. And I can say, being stood here and looking up this way, it's even more impressive. So what a wonderful venue to host what's going to be a wonderful conference for us all today. The joy of being the first speaker isn't that I just get to talk about something interesting from my research about the conference. I also have the chance to reflect on the conference as a whole and sort of talk about why are we here. And I'm going to see if my slides work. Yeah. So this is what we're here. The conference is Scaling Solutions, a Viable Path to a Sustainable Future. So as I've been reflecting on what does scale mean? What does retrofit at scale kind of actually mean? And a theory from business and industry sort of came to mind, which some of you might have heard of. It's called the Dunning-Kruger effect. And if you know, some of you will know about this, but if you don't know what this means, I think it neatly fits, I think, perhaps where the problem occurs, or one of the challenges occurs. So really, this is all about plotting a line between how confident you are at achieving or delivering a specific challenge or problem, according to how much experience you have of doing it. And so you might then expect that as you do more of, for instance, retrofit at scale, you learn more about how to do it, you learn all of the challenges and the problems, you become better at doing it, and you might expect then your confidence would improve, so you might have this lovely kind of positive linear relationship between the two curves there. But what the research has actually found is that that line looks a little bit more like this. So what's this talking about? And I think this really fits retrofit. You learn about retrofit. You learn about how it's going to improve fuel poverty. It's going to improve health and well-being, get rid of mould and damp in homes. It's going to support green supply chains. It's going to help us get to net zero. And you suddenly, very quickly, the more you learn, you think, oh, this is fantastic. This thing called retrofit, we need it. It's going to help us. It's going to solve a lot of problems. We have to do this. And then you start doing it. And you start trying to do it at scale. And you realize the supply chains can't keep up. There's such low demand. Things keep going wrong when you actually deliver it. It costs so much to do, and you find yourself crashing down into this pit of despair. Okay, and I don't know if this is where anybody is currently at the moment. And then you do more and more, and you persevere, and you go through the challenges of doing it, and you get a little bit more confidence about how to solve some of those problems that you were facing, and up to the point where you actually end up with a sustainable path, and that's what this conference was about. So hopefully today, the challenge is we're going to drag you out of that pit of despair. All the amazing talks that you're going to hear about today are going to get us a little bit more confident about delivering retrofit at scale. If you are already at that peak, what we'll try and do is we'll just parachute you over the pit of despair so that you don't have to, you can save yourself some mental heartache there. Okay, so I don't know if that's reflective of what other people's experiences are about retrofit at scale, but it was sort of something that I thought about. So I work at Leeds Beckett University. I'm the director of the Leeds Sustainability Institute there. This is our beautiful campus, our very inefficient, beautiful campus. And the thing that I'm here to talk to you about today, we've got 35 years worth of research in the built environment, performance of buildings, but the thing we're talking about is we've got quite a bit of research experience on this. How well can we do retrofit? And how bad can it be when we get it wrong? And those two things are really important. And the government, the UK government, is really interested in those, the Scottish government too. And they funded a lot of our research over the last few years. So we started off kind of 10 years ago with some projects looking at these sorts of issues, and we've had maybe £4 or £5 million worth of research direct from government about this. And I'm not going to, you can go and check out some of this research. I'm going to give QR codes to most of the research I mentioned. The thing I will say is that the sorts of issues and problems that we were finding over in 2016 when we first started, they're still the same problems that we're spotting 10 years later, 25, and hopefully 26. That isn't to say that we aren't learning. That isn't to say that we can't learn. It's to say there's a lot of inertia in the system. And what I'm going to talk to you about today is research and the challenge of actioning research and that research affecting change. And there's a lot of good reasons why it takes a lot of time. Okay, back to the conference. So, we've had a nice introduction to why we're all here, and I've just stolen those 3 points from the website. We've got loads of old buildings, and we need to work together to retrofit. Can't do it alone. Good. And it's not if, it's how are we going to retrofit. Okay, great, we're on board. Okay, but this sort of implies that we're not very good at scaling retrofit at the moment, if you think deeply about why these are our themes, our conference themes. So let's have a look and see what the data says about how good we are at doing retrofit at scale. Not very good, apparently. So this is the research data. This is the government's data, and you can see a huge reduction in the amount of insulation. These are the sorts of retrofits that we want to see in people's homes. We're not very good at delivering that, for whatever reason. And most of the retrofits that do take place in this country are policy funded. So the success of policy funded retrofit schemes is really important to the overall retrofit landscape. Okay, there's lots of reasons why that is the case. And one of the valid questions that we get when we show people the data is, well, if fabric retrofits are so hard, can't we just shove a load of heat pumps in homes? And I totally get on board with that, and it's a really legitimate question. But what I'm just going to say a few things about that, which is taken from a TED talk that I did, which you can go and have a look at the full one if you want to. This is just a graph which shows the electricity that we supply into UK homes in any average year. There's a little bump in the middle because we use a bit more lighting, it's darker, and we use a little bit more electric heating in the winter, but it's relatively stable. In stark contrast to the amount of gas that we use in winter, we have this thing called peak heat. So we use an absolute ton of gas in our homes. So the obvious problem is we can't just switch to electricity because we don't have enough electricity. Okay, fine. However, I hear you cry. Heat pumps are so much more efficient than gas boilers. That's absolutely true. And so what I'm going to show you is how much electricity we would need if we were to switch over to heat pumps. Considerably less than gas, but still considerably more than we actually have. Okay. I think some of the formatting might be slightly so don't quote these numbers, but do check the TED talk, it's better. So we can't just use heat pumps exclusively. What do we need to do? We need to reduce that peak heat down. How do we do that? Well, we can do that with retrofit. So we can bring that curve, that peak heat demand curve back down. So we're in a better fighting chance of delivering the amount of electricity we would need to support the heat pumps. Okay, so these are not exclusive options. They are complementary options. We need both. I would just quickly say that this is completely hypothetical. Okay, this peak heat challenge of capacity in the grid is very theoretical because at the moment, yes, certainly some formatting issues going on. At the moment, the progress of installing heat pumps is so miserably low, we're nowhere near that problem. So throw as many heat pumps in as many homes as you possibly can find. We're not at that challenge. It will be a good thing when we get to that capacity challenge because it means we're making real progress. Okay, we can't talk about scaling up without just briefly mentioning policy. This is the graph to show all of the different measures, how many measures were installed under each of the different policy schemes that the UK government have put on, the eco scheme. And it doesn't take a professor to point out that at the end of every policy cycle, the rate of retrofit plummets down to near zero. Okay, so fundamentally, unless we get away from the short-term policy cycles, it's going to undermine our ability to scale up retrofit. Last negative slide. We're really down deep at the bottom of this pit of despair, aren't we, at the moment? So the NAO, we can't go away from the fact that when we do actually achieve retrofit at scale, it can go wrong. So I'm not going to talk about this at the moment, but what I would say is that some of the things that were found in there actually weren't a big surprise to people who were looking for these issues. And we've got absolutely tons of documents, recommendations, reports, research projects, standards, all looking at exactly these problems and all already identifying what they were. And the good thing for us is they've identified what the solutions were too. And this list of reports could go all the way to Glasgow. There's so much, you literally can't read as many reports as there are. So that's a good thing for us. So the conference speakers were each asked to define one of their B themes, and mine was be skilled. It was the one that I sort of self-allocated. That doesn't mean that everybody has to become an expert. It means we just need to become better at accessing all of the amazing information that's already out there. Okay, so now what I'm going to talk about, that's sort of my general thoughts. And now I'm just going to talk about a few things about my research and why I think research is important for helping scale up retrofit. And then I'm going to move on to, if we're going to scale up loads of retrofit, I think we should be scaling up monitoring of retrofit or at the same time, evaluating those retrofits. So just two things to talk about. Okay, what's research in retrofit? Well, for me, research is you can do tests on buildings, you can test in laboratories, you can do models and simulations, or you can go and test in the real world, in people's homes, real people. This is an example of something that sits in the middle. So this is a facility based up in the north of England. It's built by Northern Gas Networks. It's their net zero research village. So there's the model homes are built here. They're not occupied, so they're not real buildings. But they're not a lab either, because they are controlled, but we're monitoring it, but it's in the real world, exposed to weather. So we've done some work baselining and understanding thermal performance of these buildings, and that means we can test different things. We can put different retrofits in there and see what the intended performances, were they achieved, but also what happened to their risk profiles. Were we introducing risks? And the current project that we're working on, you can have a quick look at, it's not started yet, is looking at things around heat pumps. People are really concerned about heat pumps for many different reasons. We can go and test those things. And that's what research is really good at. It can test specific questions and find specific answers. So what happens if I don't run my heat pump optimally? You know, will it plunge me into fuel poverty? We can test those things. So a project that we've done, which I wanted to show some actual results from, this is another scale. So this is a laboratory test this time. And one of the real concerns that people have with internal wall insulation is that it can cause interstitial condensation or moisture buildup inside the fabric. Okay, we're making our bricks colder. Water doesn't like cold, you know, we want to keep things warm. So is that going to cause a problem? So we got Lucidian, who are a company in the UK, to mock up 7 different walls. And we tested those walls with different insulations in an environmental chamber. And this is what we found. So this graph shows the 7 different walls that we have and their moisture content. We want low moisture content. The first 2 bars there, that's the control wall. No insulation whatsoever. So that's relatively low. That's our starting point. The difference between the yellow and the green is just that the yellow is a traditional gypsum plaster. This is what we call non-vapor open. Okay? And then the green is a vapor open equivalent, just your standard plaster. Okay, what were the insulation types that we looked at? So the first one was a thermoreflective paint, which you may have heard of. You don't hear much of these days anymore. The next one was an insulated wallpaper, some people call it, or just a thin latex roll. The next up was a cork lime render. So before you put your plaster finish on, you do a cork lime insulation render. The next 2 is an aerogel board. Some people might have heard of aerogel. It's sort of a super insulated material. We've got 5 minutes. How long do I have? I've got till half. I've got 30 minutes, right? But 20 minutes and 10 minutes questions. Because I will quickly adjust and skip. So who's got the timer? 5 plus 10 questions. I'm stealing some question time, apologies. Okay, what did we find? We basically found that if you're using, and the final 2, sorry, were thin or thick foam insulation. Kind of what at the time was really traditional. And what we found was kind of confirming what we already knew, vapor closed, and really super insulated increased risks, fundamentally. And this hasn't fundamentally changed the way that we think about stuff, and it hasn't really changed practice. We've since proved this again in models, and we're currently looking at proving this in real-world homes, and it takes that collective evidence to sort of come up with enough momentum to get change into practice, because that's what we want to see. So really what we're saying with research is you don't have to go and do a research project every single time you're going to insulate. You should just become more informed about how we can do things. And the challenge that we have is that research, oh dear, we're in more formatting issues. It's really good at specific answers, but it's really bad at saying how we need to change to react to that research. And that's the gap that we need to start being better at. Okay. So, that's research. What about monitoring and evaluation? We'll do this a bit quicker. This is based on some research that we did with Leeds City Council, UK Green Building Council. My PhD student took this photo. She did the work. How can we make sure that this home on the left-hand side, which has been nicely retrofitted, has achieved its intended outcomes? Not because it was part of a research project, but because it was a bog-standard retrofit that everyone was doing. So Leeds had These 5 different projects, hundreds of homes, loads of different projects. And if you're going to scale evaluation, it has to cope with completely different archetypes. It has to cope with completely different project types, different insulation types. Okay, so how do we do? We took the toolkit, we applied it to all of these different projects. We made some improvements to see what quality data we could get back. And by the end, we worked out how to get some pretty decent data. At the beginning, it was pretty awful. So there's lots of challenges associated with getting really good quality data when you're scaling retrofit. So I won't go into too many of the actual issues. In terms of retrofit, in terms of the evaluation process, simplify, simplify, simplify. You cannot expect to get high resolution data, really good quality data, when you're talking about 1 million homes. You know? The second thing was the projects themselves are so complex. You need allocated budget to include in evaluation. Now, there's probably people here who've just had some funding from maybe social housing wave 3. You probably didn't get as much as you wanted, and so you've probably already made the decision, or someone has, to scrap the evaluation budget. Of course you would, because you want to insulate as many homes as possible. If you don't allocate budget, it doesn't get done. It's fundamentally. And then this other issue here of timeline, well, that's a bit more straightforward. Project ends, everyone leaves. And that doesn't work for evaluation. You have to be able to come back after the project is finished. So there's fundamental issues there. And then the final one is the people. We need to engage them. They need to know why they're doing this. Why isn't it just a consumer satisfaction questionnaire? They need to understand the benefits to them that it's going to build to better business models, all of that sort of stuff. When you can do that, and when you can find who the gatekeepers are, because even in the same council, 5 different projects, 5 completely different gatekeepers, sometimes a subcontractor, sometimes the main contractor, sometimes it was someone in the council. So even within the same organisation, it can be a completely different person. Once you can do that and create the evaluation from their point of view, you can get some really good results. And then just briefly to sum up on this last bit before I close, there's 2 different types of evaluation. What I've just been talking about is performance evaluation, how we can scale that up. Did it achieve its intended outcomes? But we've got this other thing called quality, for compliance. Just because you've got your warranty or your certificate signed off doesn't mean that it's definitely going to have achieved its intended outcomes around comfort or mould. And likewise, just because you've achieved a really good EPC doesn't mean necessarily that there aren't any unintended consequences happening. So it's 2 very different things. They need different data sets, it's a different process, but they both need scaling up, and we need to get better at that. Technology will help, AI, etc., but a lot of the solutions to this are not just technical. Okay, so for the monitoring stuff, yes, we need to be skilled, but you don't have to be an expert in evaluation. We just need to be aware of the different ways of evaluating things, and we need to move away from bespoke ad hoc things that people just sort of do once and leave and put in a drawer and never use again, to a collective thing that we're all using the same process, the same questions at the same time. And that has the beauty of being able to build up big data sets. We always talk about learning lessons and having a data warehouse, but that only works if everybody's asked the same thing at the same time in the same way. And we're not currently there yet, so there's a lot to learn. So that's all I wanted to say on why I think research can support scaling up retrofit, and what I wanted to say about how we also need to scale up evaluation at the same time as scaling up retrofit. So, to end, I hope you're going to have a wonderful conference. I'm excited to hear what people's solutions are. We're going to collectively together learn more and understand more about what the challenges that we face are. We're all going to help pull each other up that slope of confidence. So I hope you have a great day. Overall, it's about thinking and reflecting on our role in retrofit through that lens of scaling up. And that's not something that we get to do in our day jobs. So enjoy it, have a great day, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you so much, David. That was fantastic. Please join me for a few questions. So you can scan the QR code and ask David some questions. But David, you packed a lot into that presentation. There was a lot to, I think the audience will have a lot to ask. Can I go back to one of your first slides, the competence and confidence? Like, we at Best do a lot around skills and training, but that is really, you know, something we're always talking about. And then also something, I suppose, when you picked up in your last point around from your lens as your research and how it can be then scaled. You know, is there what kind of tangible things do we want to think about there?
Yeah, and it's I mean, what I was trying to get to. You picked up on it, and I'm really pleased you have. Like, nothing's more depressing in research than spending your 6 months slogging on a project, getting this report, all the minutiae of your dots in the I's and crossing the T's, and you send it into government, often in this case, and it gets read once maybe, and then put in a drawer, and then occasionally maybe rolled out at a few conferences. And so there isn't currently, that I can see, a very good solution to the funding to get the quality research that's happened into industry and into changing what our norms are. You know, not just doesn't have to change building regulations, although some of our research has, but to change people's understanding of norms. Innovate UK do a bit around trying to get research into industry, but that would often be focused on one individual company, which is great, but we need more than an individual company benefiting from research. We need to be able to give collectively that knowledge to everybody, and that's something I don't think we've quite got right. And I think it's a really difficult funding model to make that, to bridge that link.
But I think we're starting to get to the tipping point of that. Hopefully.
Well, conferences like this should hopefully do that, And we engage an awful lot. We try to be as open as possible. And we try to communicate our research in more innovative ways to achieve that. But it is a difficult challenge, and it needs a lot more concerted effort from everyone involved to work out what that solution looks like.
Yeah. No, definitely. I'm going to look at the questions in the slide. Also, we know there are technical solutions to improve pretty much every archetype, but we've not seen the mass demand of them. What 3 things should government do to create conditions to stimulate that demand and accelerate and scale? It's a big question.
3 things.
3 things.
Well,
not just one.
Money. I think we've seen that time and time again. It's so expensive to do. We have something called market failure, and that's pretty well understood in a lot of industries or a lot of situations where there's a very clear negative consequence, a very visible negative consequence of the market's decisions. So cigarettes is a really good example. We have to put a massive tax on cigarettes because it causes such ill to society. That's the correction to the market failure that the government is able to apply through its monetary or fiscal policies. The market failure of retrofit is so hidden. It's really difficult to see because it's so multifaceted. It's fuel poverty, but it's also ill health. It's also mould. And all of these issues are really, really poorly articulated and really difficult to link to that single core concept of retrofits solving everything. So I'm going to give maybe the 2 things. It needs to just have a 0 on the end of every policy that they put through. But also there needs to be a better bringing together of the market failures associated with not retrofitting at scale with the policy design.
Brilliant, thank you. That was a tough question. One question around data. So how do we use data? I suppose we kind of touched on this slightly, but how do we use data that that you have gathered to stop repeating the analysis piece and move to the delivery? And we did kind of touch on that a minute ago.
Yeah, no, definitely. And this is why that second bit that I was talking about, scaling up monitoring, is really a really important piece in my opinion. So at the moment, some of you will have done projects. You might have done 100 homes over here, 200 homes over there, and you've done an evaluation piece. And maybe you've got a consultant to do it. Maybe you threw some sensors into some homes. Maybe you did 10%, and then you did a questionnaire. And maybe you looked at the EPCs. But you did that in such a, well, if you did it like that, often we observe people do that in such an unstructured way. What do you do with the information, data once you've got it? How do you turn that data into information? And one of the things that we need to start doing is understanding and having a framework for how you collect data so that anybody can collect data on any of their projects cheaply, simply, quickly in a framework and format which is compatible. So Glasgow can start comparing its retrofit projects to Edinburgh. Edinburgh can compare to Leeds and London. That is the goal that I'd love us to see, because then we can pool the nation's data and start interrogating it. At the moment, the data is randomly distributed. The types of data are not equal, and that's really hard to collate collective knowledge from. And so that, it's a really great question. But
hopefully this might be the catalyst today for that. What level of fabric retrofit do you think is needed to create a reasonable deliverable increase in electricity generation to meet heat pump electricity demand? And that's from Alistair.
This is great. I'm involved in lots of kind of discussion groups with government, and other industry around, well, EPCs, what level of EPC do we need? What, does we all need to get to a C? I think there's hardly any situation where my simple proposal doesn't work, I think. It's too simple to work almost in some ways, because people think it needs to be more complicated. If your loft and your walls are not insulated, you are eligible for policy funding. I don't care what your EPC is, I don't care what your heating system is, what your lighting is doing. Fundamentally, walls and lofts are so important to heat loss. Just insulate them. Remove all of the eligibility requirements. Don't think about setting specific EPC band thresholds, because that games the system. We've got papers coming out around that problem. Simplicity to me is key when we're talking about scale. And if the government could, or somebody could be brave enough to say, if you don't have insulated walls and lofts, you're eligible for all the money that you need to get that done. I appreciate it's a little bit more complicated because you've got able to pay, you've got equity and all of that sort of stuff. But fundamentally, if you've got insulated walls and lofts, that copes for heat pumps, that reduces condensation risk, it improves damp and mould, etc. So I actually think we can overcomplicate things sometimes. And in reality, fundamentally, it falls down to some pretty basic stuff.
Keep it simple, because it always gets more complicated. We've got time for one more question, and Hannah is... she's talking about, we know that we need to retrofit and it will happen, but we're still getting some feedback from colleges and universities that there's not enough demand for the retrofit courses. Just what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, this is a great question for me personally, because we're in the same situation at Leeds Beckett University. We don't have a retrofit course. So, we have all this amazing research, but we've got no courses to put that data and information into. I think one of the fundamental issues is seeing it as a separate course to construction. Seeing the skills you need to deliver retrofit as separate from just building work. To me, when we talk about the supply chain crisis and the lack of skills and training, well, actually, that's not just for retrofit. That's the entire sort of building construction supply chain. These people are incredibly skilled. If you've ever seen a plasterer create a mirror finish on a wall, you'll appreciate the quality and the skill that our existing workforce has. They are the same skills tweaked to deliver retrofit. And so I'm not sure whether, and I don't have the answer, I'm not sure whether universities are delivering traditional retrofit courses, how to do things, is necessarily going to fix the problem of existing skills and supply. The new people coming through, of course, that's great. That's the traditional route to get education and training. But for that massive population, 90% of the existing force, that we need to start delivering retrofits as well, asking them to come out of their day job and sit in a classroom and learn pretty much what they already knew, but just because of a different reason, maybe just needs a bit more innovation. So the demand for buildings generally just needs to be a bit sexier, a bit more appealing, show that there's career pathways, etc. And that will hopefully give that traditional route for the new people coming into the area the opportunity. And I think expanding it from just retrofit to being a bit, this is all part of it. People don't learn how to just, put up joists, timber joists. They learn how to do carpentry. Yes. And that's, I think, a big important thing to consider.
Great way to think about it and separating it out. I think that's us out of time for questions. But thank you so much, David. That was really inspiring, and I'm sure you'll be able to catch up with some of the audience later on. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.